We still have a month of games that need to be played, but a good amount of teams have already been eliminated from playoff contention. I went through every conference, and by my count, there are 31 teams who I think are realistically still in the playoff hunt. So that means since last week, we've lost 6 teams, as I had 37 teams who were still alive last week. Today, we're going to be going conference by conference and going through each team and looking at their remaining schedule while talking about their playoff odds. But before we get to today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are you love college football, and odds are you are subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. We're going to start in the American Conference, where I have 4 teams that are still alive in the hunt: Army, Navy, Tulane, and Memphis. All of those teams are still undefeated in conference play, with the exception of Memphis. Also, all 4 of those teams received votes in the AP poll this past weekend. When talking about these 4 teams in the American Conference, any scenario is still possible where 2 of these teams could be playing in the conference title game, with the winner getting that playoff bid. As of right now, it looks like Army has the best chance, considering they are 6-0 in conference play, they're 7-0 on the season, and they are currently ranked number 21 in the AP poll. But a lot can change over the next month. When looking at Army's schedule, they have a matchup in late November against number 8 Notre Dame, not to mention they close the season against Navy. You look at Navy's schedule, they still gotta play Tulane, and they end the season against Army. Tulane doesn't have to play Army this year, but they do have to play Navy and Memphis to close their year. Finally, with Memphis, the only team they got on their remaining schedule is Tulane, but something notable is that they played Navy earlier in the year, and they did lose. So as of right now, Navy would own the tiebreaker over Memphis. Considering these teams still gotta play each other in the month of November, all this is gonna sort itself out, but the fact that we're gonna be in November and 4 teams from the American Conference are still gonna be alive for the playoff, that's pretty respectable. Up next is the ACC, and we're down to 5 teams: Clemson, Miami, SMU, Pittsburgh, and Virginia Tech. When looking at these 5 teams, 4 of them are already ranked inside the top 20 of the AP poll, with Virginia Tech being the only team that's not ranked. They're also the only team that has more than 1 loss this year, as they're 5-3 on the season, but they are still 3-1 in conference play, so they're still alive to play in the ACC title game. When looking at Clemson's remaining schedule, they have a number of pretty difficult games remaining. They got Louisville this weekend, and then they got Virginia Tech and Pittsburgh on the road in back-to-back weeks, 2 teams that I still have alive in the ACC. When looking at Miami, they definitely have the easiest schedule of teams on today's list, as they don't have a game remaining against those other 4 opponents. SMU has a pretty big game this weekend, as they're going to be hosting number 18 Pittsburgh, so whoever gets that tiebreaker is going to have a really good shot later in the year. Pittsburgh has a difficult road because they got to go on the road to play SMU this weekend, and then they have Clemson in a couple of weeks. Finally, you look at Virginia Tech, who has 3 losses on the year, but only 1 loss in conference play. Now, it did come to Miami, so for whatever reason it comes to that, they would lose the tiebreaker to the Hurricanes. When looking at Virginia Tech's remaining schedule, they have a game at home against Clemson in a couple of weeks, but outside of that, they don't play any of the other teams that are still alive in the ACC. Now, if I were to guess, I think Clemson and Miami is probably our best bet at being the ACC title match. Like I just mentioned, SMU and Pittsburgh play each other this weekend, so one of those teams is likely going to get eliminated. And then with Virginia Tech, they already have 1 loss, so another loss the rest of the way is likely going to hurt their chances. Again, anything can happen over the final month, but I'm going to go with Clemson and Miami playing for that playoff spot. Up next, we have the Big 12, and I have 4 teams still in it. We have BYU, Iowa State, Kansas State, and Colorado, the 4 teams that are currently ranked inside the top 25 of the AP poll. As of right now, both BYU and Iowa State are in the driver's seat, considering they're both still undefeated in conference play, and they don't play each other the rest of the season. Not to mention, BYU already has a massive tiebreaker over Kansas State. So in order for BYU to lose that tiebreaker, they would have to lose 2 more games the rest of the season, while Kansas State wins out. When looking at the Cougars' remaining schedule, they got Utah, Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston, all games they're probably going to be favored in. But keep an eye on that Arizona State game on the road at Tempe. If that game is a late night kickoff, as someone who experienced many upsets while at Arizona State, teams that go to Tempe for a late night game, they go there to die. Iowa State's schedule is a little more difficult, also the fact that they have 5 games left on their schedule as well. They play Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati, and Utah, but they wrap up the season against number 17 Kansas State. And the final spot in the Big 12 title game could come down to whoever wins that game in the final week of the season. I talked about Kansas State having that crucial loss to BYU, but if they're able to win out, they're probably going to be in that Big 12 title game. They have Houston, Arizona State, and Cincinnati before wrapping up the season on the road at Iowa State. Their likely not going to leapfrog over BYU, barring the Cougars completely collapsing, so Kansas State's best chance is winning out and getting that tiebreaker over Iowa State at the end of the year. I talked about this last week, but I'll talk about it again. Colorado has the most difficult road among the Big 12 teams. They are 4-1 in conference play, so they're only one game back, but they do have a loss this year to Kansas State, so they will lose that tiebreaker. Not to mention, they don't play BYU or Iowa State, so if both of those teams win out, it doesn't matter what Colorado does because they're not going to be able to finish the year undefeated in conference play. So for the Buffaloes, they got to win out and hope Kansas State, Iowa State, and BYU drop a couple of games. Up next, we have the Big Ten, where I have 4 teams still alive in the hunt: Indiana, Oregon, Penn State, and Ohio State. Who would have thought we'd be in November and we'd be talking about Indiana as a potential playoff team? Well, here we are. When looking at their remaining schedule, they got Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, and Purdue. Now, it's likely going to all come down to that Ohio State game. If they're able to win out, I think Indiana secures a playoff spot regardless of what happens in the Big Ten title game. If they win the conference, well, they clearly clinch the automatic bid, but I still think they'd be an at-large team. So as long as they don't lose to Michigan State, Michigan, or Purdue, I think Indiana has this all but locked up. The same thing could be said for Oregon, who pretty much has this locked up as well. They play Michigan, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Washington, 4 games they're probably going to be favored in pretty heavily. Like with Indiana, I don't think it matters what happens in the Big Ten title game for Oregon. Whether they win or lose, they're still going to be a playoff team. They just have to avoid an upset in one of these matchups. For Penn State, it's likely going to come down to this weekend's matchup against Ohio State. If they lose, the Buckeyes are going to own the tiebreaker, and they're going to be behind them, Oregon, and Indiana, assuming they win their games this weekend. Now, they do finish with a fairly easy schedule as they play Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. So even if they lose this weekend to Ohio State, as long as Penn State's able to win out, I still think they're going to be an at-large bid. The final Big Ten team is Ohio State, and they have a very interesting finish to their season. They go on the road to Penn State this weekend. Now, if they were to lose that game, that's already going to be their second loss on the season, it'll be their second loss in conference play, and it's all but surely going to eliminate them from contending for the Big Ten title. So if that's the case, Ohio State definitely has to win their 4 remaining games because I don't think they're going to make it in as a 3-loss team. Well, considering the playoff committee and how they likely want Ohio State in there, I wouldn't be surprised, but Ohio State really can't afford to lose one more game the rest of the way. They play Indiana in the second to last week of the season, and that's probably going to be a difficult matchup for the Buckeyes. For Ohio State, as long as they finish the season 4-1, it doesn't matter who the loss comes against, I think that'll be enough to get them in as an at-large team. Up next is Notre Dame, who doesn't have the luxury of playing in a conference, so they don't get an automatic bid of any kind. They're probably going to have to win out and hope that a couple of teams lose in front of them. They finished the season against Florida State, Virginia, Army, and USC. They're going to be favored in all those games, and I really can't see Notre Dame dropping any of these ones, but I wouldn't be surprised if they struggle at any point. For Notre Dame, it's pretty simple. You win your final 4 games, and you're pretty much a guarantee to make it. If you lose at any point, it doesn't matter who it comes against, you're going to be out. We have one team remaining in the Mountain West, and that's Boise State. They had a massive win this weekend against UNLV, and now they own the tiebreaker over the Rebels, who are the other team fighting for a potential playoff spot. When looking at Boise State's remaining schedule, San Diego State, Nevada, San Jose State, Wyoming, and Oregon State, that's a pretty easy schedule that Boise State should win out. If they win their remaining games and win the Mountain West Championship, they are going to be a playoff team. And at that point, it's probably not even going to be because they're an automatic bid at being the highest ranked group of 5 champion. It's probably going to be because they actually finished the season ranked inside the top 12. I didn't include Washington State last week, and that's a mistake on my part. Although the Cougars don't have a chance at an automatic bid, they still have a chance to sneak their way inside the top 12. But in order for that to happen, they're probably going to need a lot of things to go their way. The remaining schedule is very easy considering they play Utah State, New Mexico, Oregon State, and Wyoming, but the issue for Washington State is the fact that they don't have any good wins on their resume. They've only played one ranked team, and it was Boise State, and they lost by 21 points. Their best win is probably a 5-point victory over Washington up until this point. Now, they are still 7-1 on the season, and they could finish the year 11-1, but I think for Washington State to actually make it inside the top 12, they're going to need a lot of teams in front of them to lose, and Washington State is probably going to have to dominate every game moving forward. We'll go to the Sun Belt, where I have one team alive as well, and that's the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. They're 7-1 on the season, and they're 4-0 in conference play. They finished the season playing Arkansas State, South Alabama, Troy, and UL Monroe, so I would expect them to win out. As of right now, I'm not sure who they would play in the Sun Belt title game, but looking at the Sun Belt standings, it's not going to be that great of a team, so Louisiana should finish the season going going 12-1. They don't have a great resume at all, and the best team they played this year was Tulane, in which they lost by 8 points. But for Louisiana, if they finish the season 12-1 and Boise State and a lot of those American Conference teams lose a couple of games, they might be able to sneak their way as to the highest ranked Group of 5 team. We'll wrap up today's video in the SEC, where I have 10 teams that are still alive in the playoff hunt. As of right now, Texas A&M is the only team in the SEC who is undefeated in conference play, so they're in the driver's seat the rest of the season. They have wins over Arkansas, Missouri, and LSU, teams that I still have in the SEC hunt. When looking at the remaining schedule, they have games against South Carolina, Auburn, and Texas. I expect them to beat South Carolina and Auburn, so it might come down to that game against Texas in the final week of the season. Obviously, if they win these final 3 SEC games, they're in and they're playing for an automatic bid in the playoff. But even if they lose to Texas in the final week of the season, I still think there's a chance that Texas A&M is one of the 2 best teams in the SEC, and they're still playing for an automatic bid. Now at that point, I think Texas A&M would have to win to secure a spot, because I don't think they'd be making it with 3 losses despite playing in the SEC title game. Georgia's resume isn't as great, as they do have a loss to Alabama, so they'll be losing that tiebreaker, but they do have a win over Texas, so they will win that tiebreaker. When looking at the remaining SEC schedule, they got Florida, Ole Miss, and Tennessee. They're likely going to be favored in all those games, and if they're able to pick up victories over Ole Miss and Tennessee, that's going to be massive for their resume, with the only tiebreaker they don't have going to Alabama. If Georgia wins out, I think they're going to be playing in the SEC title game, and whether they win or lose, they are going to be a playoff team. But if Georgia drops a game these next couple of weeks, things are going to get really interesting, as they're probably going to be an at-large team. For Texas, they're in an interesting spot, because looking at the rest of their schedule, the only game in which they're probably going to be tested comes at the end of the year when they go on the road to play Texas A&M. Now, if they're able to win out and win that final game of the regular season, they're going to own a massive tiebreaker over Texas A&M. But if they lose that game, or if they lose any SEC game the rest of the way, they're going to have 2 conference losses. They're not going to be playing in the SEC title game, and their chances of being an at-large bid are going to be really interesting. Tennessee has a win over Alabama, which could prove to be massive. When looking at the rest of their schedule, the one that stands out comes in a couple of weeks when they go on the road to take on Georgia. If they're able to pick up that win and own that tiebreaker, that could be massive and keep them alive in the SEC title hunt. But if they lose to Georgia, or any other SEC game for that matter, they're not playing for the SEC title game, and honestly, I think with a second loss, they're probably going to be bounced from the playoff discussion. LSU had a brutal loss this weekend by losing to Texas A&M, but they're still in a really good position. They have the tiebreaker over Ole Miss and Arkansas, and they play Alabama next weekend. If they're able to win that game, pick up that tiebreaker, and win out the rest of the way, they're still going to have only 1 loss in conference play. Not having the tiebreaker against Texas A&M could be what keeps them out, but maybe there's a lot of chaos and they're still able to make it despite not having that tiebreaker. Pretty much for Alabama, it's simple the rest of the way. They have to win out to have any chance at all. They already have 2 conference losses, and even if they win out, I still don't think there's that high of a chance that they're able to make it to the SEC title game. But they're on the outside looking in, as they have a chance to be an at-large bid. So for Alabama, win out, you probably sneak in, but if you lose any more games, you're probably going to be done. The same can be said for Arkansas, who already has 2 losses in conference play. They lost to Texas A&M and LSU, but they do have the tiebreaker over Tennessee. They finished the season playing Ole Miss, Texas, and Missouri, so if they're able to win out, they'll have some pretty massive tiebreakers, and who knows, things could get really chaotic, and Arkansas could pull off a miracle and sneak their way in. Missouri is 2-2 in conference play, and they have a couple of pretty bad losses to Alabama and Texas A&M, but the remaining SEC schedule looks pretty favorable. But if they're able to win out and finish with a 6-2 conference record, all I'm saying is, if a lot of other teams lose, Missouri could be in there. But considering they're not really going to have any tiebreakers over any team, that's really going to hurt the Tigers' chances. I mean, if they win out, their best tiebreaker is going to be over Arkansas, and I don't think that's going to be getting you into the SEC title game. Our final team is Ole Miss, who is also 2-2 in conference play. As of right now, they don't have any great wins either, but they do play on the road at Arkansas this weekend, and then next week they do host Georgia. So those games right there could be some pretty massive tiebreakers. Again, it's looking unlikely for Ole Miss at this point, but if they have a tiebreaker over Georgia, they win out, there's some chaos in front of them, who knows, they could potentially sneak their way in there as well and play in the SEC title game. But I definitely think they need to win out to at least be an at-large team, because I don't think they're going to be getting in with a third loss. Well, that wraps it up for today's video. Do you agree that these 31 teams are the ones that have a chance of reaching the college football playoff, or was there a team I didn't include in today's list that you think is still alive and should have been on this video? Whoever it is, let me know in the comment section down below. before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. I'm posting college football videos all season long, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, don't forget to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm and helps share the video and my channel with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.